There's some crops you wait and wait for, only to realize that they mean much more than just the harvest. It's finally time to pull up the garlic, which is nice because we look so forward to it. However, it also lets us know that we're at the back end of summer and things are about to change. There's still green tomatoes, green onions, regular onions, and a whole host of late blueberries to pick, but it's hard not to notice that the garden is about to shift. It doesn't necessarily mean that our production is going to go down. In fact, if I have anything to say about it, it's only going to get better. However, with all of the harvest and crop endings that we've had in the last few weeks, it's hard not to realize that our gardens are about to evolve. Fall plants now dominate our focus and our mind's energy, reminiscent of that spring head start that feels like a fond memory of yesterday's gone. It's been a great year so far though, and it's only gonna get even better. In case you missed it, here's volume 26 of the Garden Quickie, episodes 251 to 260. Enjoy. Tomato plants are one of the most impressive crops we grow, especially in terms of harvest and growth in general. However, left unchecked, they can grow to unwieldy proportions, and it's all due to this little guy right here. Tomato suckers, tiny little offshoots that start off their lives innocently nestled between a branch and stem. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're no sucker. Although today's episode is all about them, specifically the tomato variety. What are they and how do we deal with them? Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Few things in the garden are as misunderstood as these odd little offshoots. Like we said, tomato suckers are simply adventitious shoots that appear in the axil of where a branch meets the stem. It's all part of the tomato plant's growth cycle, and it's completely normal. Left on, the plant isn't going to die, as the adverse effects of suckers is actually quite muted. That's not to say they do nothing, however. Left on to grow, the plant will become overly bushy and not able to deal with moisture and air circulation issues in its canopy. There's a theory that suckers will also take energy away from the main canopy's production. And while this is likely probably true, the suckers themselves also flower and fruit, so for me, that one's kind of a wash. The biggest issue when growing tomatoes is keeping the plant slim and healthy on that bottom 1/3, and we do this by periodically pinching off the suckers. It's super simple, and they pop off easy. No tools required. Now, as we all know, there are 2 types of tomato plants out in the world: determinate or bush type and indeterminate or vine type. The current thinking is to prune the suckers off the indeterminate types only, leaving the determinate or bush types fully intact. For me, I play it by ear. Large bush tomatoes can most certainly benefit from some increased airflow due to pruning, but for the most part, it's not make or break for most varieties' success. What is make or break for success, though, is checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. We've done everything we were supposed to do, and the harvest is so close we can almost taste it. But even though we've been waiting upwards of 9 months for our garlic, we're still not quite there yet. A long overwintering crop that experiences all 4 seasons, garlic tests not only our gardening skills, but also our patience. However, it's not like we're just sitting around waiting for it to be ready. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, garlic is our middle name. And today's episode is all about it. Specifically, 3 things that we need to do to prepare for the imminent garlic harvest. Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. The bulk of work to get a successful garlic crop comes down to mostly just time. Big bulbs planted at the right depth at the right spacing in good soil is all you need, and virtually everyone can be successful with this crop. And while there isn't much to do for the bulk of the 9 months that this crop takes to grow, there are a few things that we can do before harvest time to max out that bulb size. 3 things in particular to ensure that we're getting the bounty that we deserve. And the first of those is just weeding. Eliminate the competition for water and nutrients so that your bulbs can reach their max size. Garlic absolutely hates competition, both from itself as well as other plants. We took the time to space it diligently in the fall, so don't let that go to waste and have the weeds steal the show. Careful when you're digging them out not to disturb that soil too much, but make sure you get them all. The garlic scapes too. They've gotta go. These are the flowers of hard-necked types of garlic, and like all blooms, they suck energy from the plant. No doubt tasty in their own right, garlic scapes will take energy away from the bulbs. So, if you haven't cut yours off already, well, you better get to it. Okay, with the competition taken out of the equation, let's talk about those resources. Like most crops, garlic loves to be constantly and consistently moist, but never soggy and never soaking wet. We do have to make sure that water is always available to allow those bulbs to actually bulb up. What that looks like in terms of a watering schedule is going to be different for everyone. Climate, zone, soil type, and of course the weather are all going to play a factor. There's no such thing as a universal watering schedule. Consistency is key, especially right now as the bulbs are beginning to swell. Regardless of schedule, however, stop all watering about 2 to 3 weeks before your intended harvest. Too wet, and your bulbs will become a nightmare to cure and store. Watering can be tricky, but once you get it, you get it. Finally, we've got fertilizing. Garlic is considered a heavy feeder, which is curious because even though it's a 9+ month crop, it only gets fed twice in its entire life cycle. Both times in the spring, in that lead up to harvest. Hard-neck garlic is planted right before dormancy, and it doesn't need any feedings until 5 to 6 months later. Feed the plants a balanced NPK mix once they reach about 4 to 6 inches tall. The second and final feeding comes in about a month after that. Just like with the watering though, make sure that you cease all feedings about 3 to 4 weeks before your intended harvest date. Fertilize too late and you run the risks of the bulbs becoming soft, mushy, and not storing well. Garlic can be super easy and highly productive as long as you're patient and you don't overthink it. Which is great because that leaves us more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. A biggie-sized cousin of garlic, onions can be monster producers in your garden if given the chance. And although getting the right variety for your area and planting it at the right time is the most important factors for success, onions like this sweet yellow Walla Walla here also like to be fed. Whether you grow your onions from direct seeding, onion sets, or pre-started plugs, this is one crop where just a few applications of fertilizer can make all the difference. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're a little bit crazy about our onions. Because today's episode is all about them. Specifically, how and what to feed your onions with to get the biggest bulbs possible. Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Although related to this garlic here, onions are not considered to be as heavy of feeders. This despite the bulbs growing to nearly 4 to 5 times the size as that of the garlic. They do need supplemental fertilizer to reach their max size, just not as much. With bulbing onions, it's not really about how much you feed, it's more about what you feed with and when in the life cycle you do it. Right off the bat, onions, which are normally planted in the spring, should be left alone for the first 2 weeks. Let the plants settle in and establish some of their root network as they transition to the new environment. After that, we can finally start to feed our onions. Initially, we want to continue to support that growth underground, so we're going to choose fertilizers that are higher in phosphorus. Phosphorus, of course, being that middle number on your NPK ratio of nutrients. Try to skew higher in that middle number, or go completely balanced across the board, at least for the first 1 to 2 feedings. In years past, I felt that with fertilizing onions, it was all about the nitrogen. Onion bulbs are not a root, and they're most certainly not a fruit, so I didn't put much importance on those other nutrients. Nitrogen is key, yes, but fed exclusively or in a ratio that's too high is going to result in giant green tops. Not only that, the necks are going to be much too big and thick to break come harvest time, and those bulbs are going to seriously underperform. Instead, we want to focus on a balanced mix that yes does have some of that nitrogen, but also starts to skew higher in that last number, potassium. Have that third number at least match your nitrogen, and your onion bulbs will explode in size. It's a simple switch of going from more nitrogen and phosphorus based to that of potassium. Now, you can go balanced, it's still going to get you there, but going this route is going to put you over the top. A typical bulb onion feeding schedule, starting with that planting date as our baseline, is therefore going to look like this. Starting 2 weeks after planting, use a phosphorus-based fertilizer to allow the plants to root and establish themselves. Apply one more feeding about 2 weeks later if you feel the plants need it. After that, switch to a nitrogen-focused fertilizer for 2 to 3 feedings spread about 2 weeks apart. Finally, for those last 1 to 2 feedings, we really need to hone in on that potassium. Again, about 2 weeks apart. 5, maybe 6 feedings in total. Onions are a 10 to 12 week crop after they're planted, and we need to stop feeding them about 3 to 4 weeks before the intended harvest. Once those bulbs crack the surface, they don't need any more nutrients from us. Which is great, because that'll allow us to sit back and check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. It's no secret that blueberries can be insanely prolific plants, even for backyard growers like us. What you may not know though are the tips and strategies to get you over the edge to get mega harvests like this. Blueberries are a cool climate powerhouse native to temperate North America. A perennial plant that once established can continue to produce for you for literal decades, upwards of 70 years. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we'll take your blueberry plants to the max. Because today's episode is all about them. Specifically, 4 things that you can do to get more berries year after year. Time's short though, as it always is, so let's dive in. Virtually pest-free, prolific, and in many cases outliving us, it's hard to find anything wrong with growing blueberries. However, there is one. One of the unfortunate side effects of blueberries being such a long-lived plant is that they don't get going for us right away. In fact, they don't produce flowers, and thus fruit, on branches and stems that are less than a year old, well into their second season. This is because blueberries are plants that need a winter chill and a winter dormancy to produce flowers. Known as vernalization, a blueberry shoot needs to grow first and then go dormant before it can produce for us in its second year. And even then, we won't get reliable production until the third or fourth year in most cases. With blueberry plants, age most certainly matters. Another possible roadblock for berry production is your soil's pH. Blueberries are a woodland swamp-type plant that has evolved to require an acidic soil. If the pH is too high, these guys simply won't produce. For the best results, keep your blueberry soil between 4.5 and 5.5, and this is most easily controlled through fertilizer. Another huge contributor for a blueberry success are friends. The more, the better. Blueberry plants are self-fertilizing, yes, but they're not very good at it. More bushes and more varieties of them is going to allow for increased pollination, bigger berries, and more fruit overall. Don't skip this tip, as growing just one single solitary blueberry bush can often be highly disappointing. Finally, we have moisture. At no point during a blueberry's life cycle can it be allowed to dry out, but especially during berry producing season. Constant and consistent moisture without being waterlogged is the goal we're after here. Blueberry bushes are quite shallow rooted, so don't expect them to go searching for water in the heat of summer. With a lack of moisture, it's the berries that get sacrificed first. Give your blueberries enough water leading up to and even during the harvest. But also make sure you leave enough time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. Moisture. It's the lifeblood of our garden and the nectar that keeps our plants alive and producing. Why then can't we just water away without a care in the world? Why is too much water considered just as bad for our plants as too little? Plants use water for virtually every life function: photosynthesis, nutrient transport, structural support, and overall growth, and even temperature regulation. How then can there be possibly too much of this good thing? Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we always water the right amount. And it's the focus of today's episode, specifically drainage, and why it's so important for the health of our plants. Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. To get to the heart of why drainage is so important, we have to look at the 4 basic plant needs: light, air, water, and of course nutrients. It's the middle 2 that holds the answer we're looking for. Plants, like all living things, needs oxygen to survive. Yes, the leaves do give off O2 as part of their respiration cycle, and we're thankful for it, but the roots also need their own oxygen supply to grow, elongate, and function. Without oxygen, the roots quickly perish, and as you well know, if the roots go, the plant isn't far behind. This is where water comes in, specifically the drainage of it. You see, the amount of air, i.e. oxygen, that's available within a soil is directly proportional to the amount of water that's in that same profile. Tiny matrices of space are dotted throughout any soil. Some are filled with air, and others are filled with water. If all the spaces are only filled with air, then quite likely your soil is a dusty cloud of death. If, however, all those spaces are filled with water instead, well, that's just as bad, because quite likely your roots are eventually going to suffocate. Enter drainage. We want the soil to be able to hold on to water, sure, the plants need it, but we also want that soil to be able to shed the excess. Because if it can't, it's not going to be very fun for the plants. What is going to be fun for you and your plants, though, is checking out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. Some crops we're lucky in that all we need to do is plant and water, and they take care of the rest. Not so with tomatoes, because despite their popularity, they're a little more needy than this. Talk about a plant that needs some support. Tomatoes may grow to ungodly proportions, but for many varieties, this is not possible with at least a little help from us. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we'll support your tomatoes even if they look like this. Because today's episode is all about staking them, specifically why we do it. There's 4 main reasons to stake your tomato plants, and we'll cover them all here today, albeit quickly. Time short as you know it is, so let's dive in. There's more than a couple ways to stake your tomato plants. You've got your tomato cages, the Florida weave, and the method that we're going to be using here today, a simple single bamboo pole. Whichever method you choose though, there are a few general rules to follow. Generally, you can start staking your tomatoes when they have 3 to 4 nodes and are about a foot tall. Tie them nice and snug, but not to the point of constricting, and always secure those stems above a node rather than below it to prevent them from snapping. The number of secure points varies with the variety, but you can never go wrong securing every second node. Okay, that's the how, but what about the why? We mentioned that there are 4 main reasons why you'd want to be staking your tomato plants. And the first of those is simply support. This one's fairly obvious, but it's also the most important. For all their varieties, tomatoes come in 2 general types: determinate or bush type and indeterminate or vine type. Indeterminate tomato varieties are inherently not able to support their own growth. Eventually, some or all of those stems are gonna flop over, especially when they start to develop the fruit. Falling over, either onto itself or especially onto the ground, makes tomatoes highly susceptible to blight and other diseases. We avoid this by staking them. Staking also facilitates more air circulation at the base of the plant, leading to healthier growth and further limiting that disease as well as crop loss. Keeping the plants upright and the foliage directed towards the sky maximizes that sun exposure, further leading to more growth and thus more fruit. On top of that, keeping the plant's correct orientation also limits any sun scalding to those precious tomatoes. And lastly, vertically staking our tomatoes allows for an easier harvest. We can simply pluck off the fruit as it ripens, as it's just sitting there ready for the taking. And less work means more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. The annual strawberry bonanza is always a sense of accomplishment. And we may have harvested close to 1,000 berries this year. But honestly, it feels like it's never enough, and we wish it would never end. The harvest may indeed be coming to an end, but winter dormancy is still a long ways off. It may feel like some sort of strawberry limbo, but trust me, there are things to do. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, our strawberry work is just getting started. And today's episode is all about it. Specifically, what to do with your June bearing, and in some cases your ever bearing strawberries after the harvest. Time's short though, as it always is, so let's dive in. As one of the first crops to be collected in the early spring and into summer, strawberries are unique in that even after the harvest, the plants look no worse for the wear. Most crops we grow seem to call it quits in conjunction with the harvest. But as a perennial powerhouse, strawberries are already thinking about next year. But to get there, the plants still need a few things from us, and the first of those is moisture. Already a moisture-loving woodland-type plant, strawberries tend to end their harvest at the onset of the hottest time of the year. With the harvest done and the berries gone for the year, it can be real easy to forget about your strawberry patch or containers. But at this time of the year, that could prove fatal. Continue to water your strawberry plants. It's vital. The other important resource in a strawberry plant's life is, of course, nutrients. Now, for as prolific as these plants are, they only get fed twice a year, and one of those times is right now. At the end of the harvest, all strawberry plants want to do is build back up their reserves for the impending winter dormancy. A healthy, balanced feeding now is going to ensure max yields come this time next year. Don't skip this one. Commercial growers know it. It can make all the difference. Now is also a great time to do another round of weeding. Strawberry plants will always grow and perform their best when given the space away from competition. Not to mention, weeding now means so much less work later. Keep the plants free and clear so that they can hit the ground running in the spring. And lastly, we have our fourth and final post-harvest strawberry care tip, and that's simply to start over. Strawberry plants, even though they're perennial, only seem to last about 5 to 6 years. If your mother plants and patch are nearing their end of life, right now is when you'd replace it. Even your pots and containers will eventually become spent. Planting is super easy, and I've covered it many times before. You can use this year's runners or an already established plant like I'm doing here today. Just make sure to plant your new strawberries at least 6 weeks before your first fall frost date. The key is to get them in the ground and established well before winter. First year plants don't really produce any flowers or fruit, so right now is the time to replant our patch so that we don't miss a beat for next season. Just like you shouldn't miss the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Using over-the-counter products for our plants and crops is nothing new. The trick is trying to determine which ones are actually beneficial and which are just a bunch of malarkey. Like this aspirin here, long touted as a tomato savior. What exactly is the deal with these simple pills and one of our favorite backyard crops? For tomatoes, it's all about the impressive foliage, explosions of flowers, and of course, the bounty of fruit. What can aspirin do for this amazingly popular backyard crop that we're not doing already? Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we give you the straight science. And today's episode is all about it. More specifically, what's the science behind aspirin helping out tomatoes? Does it really work? And if it does, how do we apply it? Time's short as you know it is though, so let's dive in. When using something new in the garden, even a common over-the-counter product, we always have to ask ourselves, what's the benefit? In the case of aspirin, its main ingredient is a compound that tomatoes produce naturally, so we know the risk is pretty low. But what is the benefit? Salicylic acid, the main ingredient in aspirin, has been found to be produced in small quantities by members of the nightshade family whenever they're stressed. In other words, it's a chemical immunoresponse by the plants to fortify their defenses. By applying this ingredient to our tomatoes, as well as our peppers eggplants, and even potatoes, the heightened response from this stress chemical can increase growth, increase vigor, and of course, increase your harvest levels in all the nightshades. First discovered at Cornell University and supported by the USDA, the use of salicylic acid, with all other factors being equal, will grow better tomato plants with more fruit. That's great. Where do we sign up? And more importantly, how do we use it? Well, application is actually super simple. Take a non-coated 325 milligram aspirin and dissolve it in 1 gallon/4 liters of water. Dissolved and directly sprayed onto the leaves foliarly seems to have a greater effect, and it's much easier than trying to get the aspirin into the soil. Once your tomatoes have been planted outside for at least 2 weeks and are at least 6 weeks old, begin spraying them twice a month all the way up to the harvest. Spray the whole plant liberally, fruit and all. While it's not a miracle cure for disease and poor performing plants, and it should really only be used for prevention and fortification, it really does work. A small, inexpensive, easy thing that can yield you big results. Much like watching the next episode of the Garden Quickie. As one of the most popular herbs grown indoors and out, this plant is sold year-round to kitchen growers who often have to rebuy it 3 to 4 times. And while I absolutely love basil, there's no reason to rebuy it over and over, as long as you know this one simple technique. Left alone and unchecked, basil will most certainly grow impressive, if not unwildly. Its life cycle cut short, however, as it is in all herbs, by the eventual flowering. There has to be a better way. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, I gotta admit, we're a little bit basil crazy. And today's episode feeds into that obsession as we talk about how you can make your biggest and best basil plant ever. Time short though, as it always is, so let's dive in. When I first started out growing basil, many moons ago, I would do it all wrong. Well, maybe not all wrong, but I would copy what the commercial growers and the big box stores did. When you buy a pre-started basil plant at the store, you're not buying a single plant. You're in fact buying many. This guy here is not a single plant, but probably 20 or even 30 basil plants. Why would commercial growers be so wasteful like this? Well, it makes sense. Seeds are cheap and basil grows incredibly fast. It makes for an impressive plant that sells well by convincing us of unlimited bounty. But that life cycle will soon be cut short by flowering or bolting. So no matter how many shoots are coming out of the pot, it's not going to help us if they're all flowering, turning those leaves bitter and inedible. Instead, a better way to grow basil is starting out with a single stalk and a single plant. I admit, it does look sparse, but it's not going to stay this way. How the hay, though, is this supposed to get us to that basil bounty bonanza that I promised? Well, the answer to that lies in proper pruning. Basil, a member of the mint family, sends out new shoots on every node along the stem. Now, if you've never heard of them, nodes are the intersects along the stems where leaves branch out on opposing sides. Much like the suckers on tomato plants, basil sends out twin shoots from the axils of these nodes, and it does so aggressively. Pruning the stem right above one of these nodes is going to activate 2 new shoots, causing them to branch out, grow vertical, and become 2 new leaders themselves. Cutting the stems on your basil plant in this fashion is not only going to produce larger, bushier plants, but it's also going to stave off that dreaded flowering. With successive and constant pruning, it doesn't take very long to finally get that basil plant of your dreams. Just like it doesn't take long to watch another episode of the Garden Quickie. As one of the longest crops we'll ever grow, the last thing we'd ever want to do is miss the harvest. But if we're not careful with our garlic, this is exactly what will happen. It's bad for a few different reasons, and you can tell that you're late to harvest your garlic in a couple different ways. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we know a thing or two about garlic. And today's episode is all about it. Specifically, how to tell that you've harvested your garlic too late and why that matters. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Hardneck garlic is a game of patience. Planted in the fall, lying dormant all winter, it explodes with growth in the spring for that final lead up to a bulb harvest around midsummer. For as long as that takes, it's all pretty formulaic. Your garlic will be ready to harvest when 1/2 to 2/3 of the leaves have turned brown and died off. And that's our first clue that we've likely missed the harvest date. If your garlic foliage has turned all brown and completely died off, well, chances are you've waited too long. Following it down to the soil, we're likely going to find split bulbs, possibly shrunken, and maybe even dried up. The garlic, if still covered by its papery protective coating, is still perfectly edible. And so, if we can eat it, why does it matter? Why do we care if we harvested it too late? Well, sure we can eat it, but we can't necessarily store it. And for a crop that is harvested all at once in the late summer and has to last us well into next year, storage is an absolute must. When garlic is left in the ground too long, the protective papery coating runs the risk of breaking down. The cohesion of the cloves and the bulb as an entity is central to the storage integrity of all garlic. Even if it doesn't appear outwardly damaged, it could be the difference between keeping good for 2 months versus 10. So, try to harvest your garlic in that ideal window and avoid waiting too long and possibly jeopardizing the crop. And if you can, try to leave time to check out an episode or two of the Garden Quickie. Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if Garden Quickies are your thing, make sure to subscribe and click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.